Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series with your hosts, David Rich and Calvin Tomashko. Calvin, how are you?
I am doing great. We're about to be astonished with knowledge here, and I'm excited.
I'm very excited about this show. I was happy to see the name, the Black Alliance for Peace, when I first came across it on Basecamp, and then researching it. It's just absolutely fascinating to me, and glad to have you guys on to talk about this very important topic for sure. We have Vashina and Nick, both members of the BAP here in the Chicagoland area, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you guys can allocate whoever you think might kind of commandeer the conversation concerning the history of the BAP up to this point. Sheena, if you want to take the mic, or Nick, it's up to you guys.
I'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
So the Black Alliance for Peace began in 2017 with the goal of rebuilding the internationalist anti-war positions of the Black radical tradition. So we're a network of organizations and individuals who've come to an understanding of the connections between U.S. imperialism and the militarized oppression of Black people domestically. And so we oppose these oppressive structures through our organizing work, educational activities, movement support, and a lot of other things. And so the ideology and political line of BAP is based on our understanding of this country as one that was birthed through the European invasion of the Americas, genocide of indigenous people, and the enslavement of African people for profit. And, you know, as well as an understanding that the connection between these barbaric events and the endless wars that the U.S. initiates is that these wars are simply quest to maintain and expand that hegemony and expand capital. So U.S. corporations continue to make billions off the land, labor, and resources of colonized people in the United States and everywhere else. So essentially that started based upon the understanding that, in Biden's words, nothing is fundamentally changed. So, you know, with things like mass incarceration, increased militarization of police in our neighborhoods and in our schools, being starved of resources and surveilled, police murders, the repression of our movements, and the list goes on. You know, we see how African people in this country continue to be exploited and abused by this empire 500 years after the transatlantic slave trade. Same systems of oppression, different names for it, and more complexities in how they execute it.
Right.
And so we also know that this doesn't begin and end with us. This country is the biggest threat to human rights, both domestically and globally. And we've taken it upon ourselves, along with many other dedicated organizations, to make it a known fact among the masses, because we see it as our duty as people living within the heart of empire to reject these instances of U.S. imperialism. And during the last presidential election, you know, we kept hearing people talk about voting out fascism and holding the Democratic Party accountable, and how did they phrase it? Pushing Biden to the left, but we haven't seen any of these things happen. You know, with everything that I just laid out, it's really hard for me to see when fascism has ever been a non-reality for colonized people in this country. Right. But this is the type of politics that created a specific challenge for the Black Alliance for Peace in trying to rebuild these anti-war positions, from the first Pan-African Congress in 1900 to the anti-Vietnam War movements of the 60s. It wasn't uncommon for Black organizations to have an unrelenting internationalist stance. And this is what we mean when we talk about the Black radical tradition. And so what the Black Alliance for Peace seeks to do is combat and expose the damage that neoliberalism and neocolonialism has done to the collective consciousness of Africans in the United States, and make the important connections between state violence and U.S. imperialist practices abroad. Like I mentioned, that is made up of both organizations and individuals who are aligned with our points of unity. So if folks are interested in getting involved, you can go to blackallianceforpeace.com, read the principles of unity, and if you agree with them, submit an application. Our membership is made up of Africans or Black people, but we also have a solidarity network of non-Africans who support our work, so you can find the application for that in the link as well. But to give a little bit more background about BAP and our campaigns, I'll pass it over to Nick.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's hard to follow up. So
it was very well said.
Very well. History of that, recapturing the Black radical tradition and the anti-war, anti-imperialist, pro-peace positions. And in that, we have several campaigns that, we work to ensure and enact that. So the first campaign is, is an attempt to end the permanent war agenda. And there are no compromise, no retreat, which is our slogan as well. And this is essentially defeating what we recognize as war on all African people, domestically and internationally. We recognize that there is connections to our oppression, repression, and exploitation, and that starts with things like the 1033 program, which is a transfer of military equipment to localities and municipalities that then are used to occupy neighborhoods, military equipment, and that was once used to occupy countries and to enact war, violence on other Black and brown folks all over the global South, right? So we recognize that there's a connection there, as well as, training personnel. So Israeli forces training police here through the Deadly Exchange Program. It's called different things in different places, but essentially the personnel are trained. They adopt strategies. And, I think it's interesting during the uprisings in Ferguson, Black Lives Matter activists were communicating with Palestinian activists on how to combat those tactics because they were being used. Absolutely.
Wow.
So, so when we talk about the domestic warfare going on in our communities and the international warfare going on in other places, there are deep connections and ties that we have to draw, these parallels between to understand, because I think Ajamu said that, our national organizer, right? This is a global problem. So the only way to solve it is a approach, right? And oftentimes that's missing, especially here in the West. So that campaign I'm speaking to, the No Compromise, No Retreat, what we're aiming to do and our demands within it is essentially looking to abolish the 1033 program. We want to stop the training of Israeli, U.S. and police forces. We want to, obviously shut down the Africa Command, which is a separate campaign, but that's within it. And, we're looking at the things like eliminating the Operation Relentless Pursuit, which is this anti-crime program, which I compare to, the best easily understood, is a revamped crime bill. That's really what it is. The program is targeted in the most Black populous states where they recognize there's too much crime. After the previous summer with the death of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony Dayton and so many others, this is a long list. This is really the history of the United States. But the previous summer in particular, we saw that police don't stop crime. That in fact that the manufactured conditions of these neighborhoods is the only way to solve, right? You want to ensure public safety and deter crime. You'd have to actually solve those contradictions in those neighborhoods. They have no interest in doing so. They want to maintain, right, what they deem orderly, and maintaining that order, it requires the violent repression and quelling of those they deem disorderly, which are people who have fallen out of the labor market, which are people who are, acting and responding to their material conditions. So crime is survival. So they lock them all up in the prison industrial complex. And that tactic is used globally, right? So you underdevelop these countries by exploiting the land, labor, and resources in an effort to justify, right, the so-called war on terror, right? So that leads us into our next campaign, which is the U.S. out of Africa, or shut down AFRICOM, which is going to be probably the main point of today's conversation. And essentially, AFRICOM was established in 2008, October 1st. And this month actually is our month of action, where we are aiming to educate through teach-ins and publications and other means on what AFRICOM is, why it exists, and why it's harmful. As you said earlier before we began the show, people don't hear about these things, right? And one, it's violent, it's inhumane, but it's undemocratic, right? If people knew where their money was going, they wouldn't support the permanent war agenda, right? Instead, they would much rather have housing, healthcare, education, and other things that are conducive to human life and prosperity. But instead, they're not really given a choice, right? Even right now, when you look at, the Build Back Better plan, which is the bare minimum, it's struggling to pass, but they just passed a Senate appropriations bill for the Pentagon and gave them $10 billion more than was asked of them. So when you recognize this is we know it's a duopoly, but imperialism in particular and capital as well is a bipartisan project. So when we're looking at, U.S. out of Africa or our Shut Down Africa campaign, the month of October is a way to raise awareness of the contribution to the effort to build a large movement of demilitarization and anti-imperialism, which has been very, I think, absent in the West for quite some time. There have been organizations and movements that have tried, but from the 70s and 80s of suppressions of Black radicals and other anti-war left forces, they were quelled by things like the counterintelligence program, right? Infiltrating, undermining and entering and using violence, killing people like Fred Hampton for their politics, which were, anti-imperialist. And those are the things that we're trying to recapture today. There's a long history, as my comrade Sheena walked y'all through, of Black folks being radical and against war. We recognize that war, one, is anti-human, but two, we don't benefit from it. We're not going to fight in wars that would never benefit us and aren't on just causes, right? So though we are an organization that is pro-peace, we're not pacifists, but because we do believe in self-determination. And the only way self-determination can be achieved at times is through those means, unfortunately, especially for colonized and oppressed people, right? I'm not going to tell an oppressed person, I'm not going to tell a slave to be like, hey, maybe you can talk it out with the slave master. that's just silly. I'm not gonna do that, right? So
that ought to work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We needed that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Here you go. Go ahead.
You know what? Maybe I was. Maybe that's my fault. Right?
I never thought of it that way. Go ahead, guys.
Right?
Sorry.
Although we're pro-peace, we're not pacifists. Right. And essentially, the campaign is an educational one, but also a mass movement. And what we're aiming to do is demand the demilitarization of the African continent, withdraw all U.S. forces in Africa, and the closure of all the bases. Right. So AFRICOM, as I said, started in 2008, but it was proliferated under the Obama administration. It was, and through that. It should be mentioned that Africa has been a place of war for quite some time, through the 50s and 60s, from places like DRC, Somalia, Ethiopia, Morocco, Libya in 2011, which is devastating, which I'll get to, and even Angola, right? But these aren't wars and conflicts that the United States are, it's not always evident. They're very indirect, sometimes through the funding or supporting of opposition parties that support the U.S. agenda. And these opposition parties never have the interest of the African masses in these countries. So essentially, the Shut Down Africa or AFRICOM and U.S. out of Africa campaign is aiming to raise awareness on this and make these demands, right, to the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, and joining other organizations that are anti-war as well, and building a movement, a mass movement that has an anti-imperialist politic and a clear analysis on this full spectrum dominance that the U.S. has been pursuing since its inception, since it's been an industrial power. Since the chattel slavery had developed in the prison industrial complex again. So that's really our campaigns. And again, we have our month of action. The 24th, Chicago is having a teach-in. So if you want to get in depth in AFRICOM, that AFRICOM is a military operation that is on the guise of terrorism. Though every major study by independent organizations has shown terrorism has actually risen with the U.S. presence. So even if you believe for a moment the U.S. was there for benevolent means, they're not achieving their goal anyway, so they should get out of there, right? But really, Navy admirals have already admitted that the real reason for AFRICOM is to protect international interests of corporations, so multinational corporations, as well as, this is verbatim, the free flow of resources out of Africa. So this is the timber, the oil, the verbanium, the tin, the copper, the steel, and all these natural resources that don't exist anywhere else. So Google, Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, the pharmaceutical industry would not be able to operate without the land and resources of these countries, right? So we can get more in depth about that and all those things, but that's the basic things of our campaigns that we're working on. Shut Down AFRICOM and end the war against Black folks domestically and globally. So no compromise, no retreat.
All right. Very cool. Sheena, do you have anything you want to add to that before we go into our barrage of questions?
No, I think we can go ahead and get started with the questions. I think we so far given a pretty
a solid 15-minute introduction. That's awesome. I'm serious. That's great. You clearly both know what you're talking about. Calvin, do you want to kick it off? Questions?
Yeah, I'll start with, just for our audience, we have posted into the comment sections on both YouTube and Facebook. We got 6 people watching live right now. Thank you so much. And below is that I believe Facebook event page for y'all to check out coming on the 24th.
Okay, great. So I have a ton of questions now after all that. I definitely want to know more about AFRICOM and like its history and like where more detail of what's going on now. Obviously, generally speaking, it's about protecting resources out of Africa. I get that, but like if you have any more details. But I also want to ask you first, as far as the Congressional Black Caucus goes, do you have their ear? Are they listening to you, or is this something are you still trying to get to them?
I would say that they are well aware of AFRICOM's existence, and they are well aware that there is opposition to it. I think that is a developing situation to where how much are they listening? I think, to be quite honest with you, that because of how the two-party system's set up and because they're kind of indifferent, I don't have the biggest faith in them to necessarily
Gotcha.
all of a sudden change their mindset. Historically, what has changed is transformed society are mass movements. We put them to hold them accountable because that's their job, but we don't rely upon them to change these conditions. It's going to be brought about by a mass movement, and that's really more of our goal. So to answer the question, yes, but they're not going to move on that or necessarily make that a national discourse or conversation.
Gotcha. Okay.
I absolutely agree with Nick. I don't think that this is going to be a part of the national discourse. I think that they are well aware that, the vast majority of countries in Africa rejected AFRICOM from the very beginning. And it wasn't until the murder of Gaddafi that, they were able to actually enact AFRICOM, because before that, there was absolutely no support for it. And so I don't have a whole lot of faith in the Congressional Black Caucus, but we will continue to put that pressure on them.
Yeah,
gotcha.
So I have a question about instances where perhaps labor has helped out. I'm hoping for a moment of solidarity, much like where labor and the Palestinian cause did a general strike during the most recent onslaught of attacks. And it was fairly effective to get to a cease moment. Have there been actions like that? And I also find, and hopefully that would be an effective organizing thing to do here in the U.S. to pressure the corporations to yield on some of these grounds. Any relations to labor or any positive interactions there?
So can I take this? Is that cool, Sheena?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's actually a really excellent point. Historically, labor internationally has been able to thwart like imperialist or colonial actions. South Africa is a perfect example during apartheid. That being said, I don't know if labor is organized effectively here for numerous reasons. The 80s of Reaganism really destroyed labor and effectively dismantled their ability to organize. And we had, I would say, several decades of kind of silence and an absence of the labor movement. That being said, I think social movements are regaining that energy, right? I think a stat that I looked at was like in the early 60s and 70s, there were maybe 1,500 strikes a year. And then from like the early 90s throughout the 2000s through 11, there was like maybe like 4 or 5. So labor has not been effectively organized massively in a way. That being said, I'll give you an example of where labor could come in. So there was recently a lawsuit in the DRC against Google, Microsoft, Tesla, Apple, these major tech companies that use cobalt, right? And they were in the DRC and they were using child labor and they were using tons of child labor. Yes, and people had died. Many children were dying, and they're also being paid, petty starvation wages as well, which is a separate thing. And these companies go here for the cheap labor, and that's one of the reasons they do that. Labor internationally was in solidarity. You couldn't just bounce around places and do that, which is like usually called multiple sourcing, right? They have domestic enterprise, and when domestic enterprise strikes, they'll just ramp up production in the international enterprise. And that's a tactic they've been using for quite some time. That being said, if labor was organized here, imagine if Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Tesla and Facebook employees striked in solidarity with these African children, right? This would put a halt to a lot of things and it would immediately thrust the conversation nationally. You would have to come to terms with it of why they were striking. But again, labor has been defectively dismantled and it's in a rebuilding process. And I don't know if it has the capacity to do that, unfortunately. I think it should be doing it, but I also see that people's material conditions have been, in decline here. And America is highly individualistic. The culture is, and it reproduces that. So that's why I think any movement for labor domestically has to be tied internationally, or you will not be getting what you're fighting for. You'll always get crumbs and bits, and you'll always have a movement that will be, unfortunately, ineffective at achieving the end goal of really, democratized workplaces, healthcare, and workplaces where the the wages that you make, and you own the means of production. So that's I hope that answers the question. Labor is certainly an integral part, but currently it is not organized effectively to be able to host any combat to the national corporation.
Yeah, the entire labor movement here and elsewhere needs a massive boost. Union is a bad word in America for some reason, and I don't know why, because unions built this country. It's just ridiculous. I mean, well, a lot of the country in the early 1900s. Rob D. Rich is here asking, is there any events coming up besides this one? I'll be out of town. Are there other ways to support BAP?
Yeah. If that brother is African, I would encourage him to join the Black Alliance for Peace. If he is not, he can join our Solidarity Network. And essentially what that is, if you go to the website, you can just go to join, and it'll show you the different tiers of how you can get involved. And then you can sign up for our US OAN, our US Out of Africa network, and that'll send you bulletins. So the bulletins are put out, I think, monthly, and it gives updates on all the different countries and how AFRICOM is operating, right? So recently, you saw, Somalia, there's drone strikes constantly, and they're trying to expand into Kenya. We saw coups in Mali a couple months ago. We saw a coup in Guinea most recently, and then we report on that and how it's related to AFRICOM, or how AFRICOM's presence has produced the conditions for these things to take place. So that's a way to get involved, just to stay informed, and then bringing that discourse to the national stage, bringing it everywhere you're at, because a lot of people, again, do not know about AFRICOM and its nefarious kind of intent.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to add that the teaching is also virtual. So, even if you're not in town to, be here for it, you can still get online. And also on the BAP website, on the first page of the website, there's an entire calendar of all of the events that we're going to be having for the month of action. So you can also tune in to any of the virtual events there. Or if, one of them is where you're traveling, you can attend one of the in-person events too.
Oh, great. Now that I know it's virtual, what day of the week is it? At what time?
It is on Sunday at 1 p.m., Sunday the 24th.
No, I work on Sundays. Okay, well, I will try to get information from one of you two, maybe, about how. Oh, good. Great. Oh, that's great. That's great. And is there a formal membership to BAP?
Yeah, so if you go to blackallianceforpeace.com/join, that's where you'll find the application, and you'll also be able to take a look at our points of unity. As long as you agree with those, then there's no reason you shouldn't be able to join BAP, as long as you align with those principles.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to check it out for sure. I'd love to be a part of this. And now that I know that you're not pacifist, because that was the only part that concerned me going in, I'm like, are they pacifists? And they don't think that violence can be used for good? Not that I promote violence, as I tell my co-host Calvin, I'm dedicated to peace. I'm not absolutely dedicated to peace. To not. I said say nonviolence. Sometimes you just got to slap them around a bit. Like you said, Nick, real quick, like you said, I could not fault a slave for kicking the crap out of his master. I can't do that. I'm like, no, of course you should do that. Right. So go ahead. Sorry, Calvin.
No worries. No, great point. Always appreciated. I just wanted to highlight how much I appreciate that there is solidarity between the Black community and labor, and that it can be international. And I was blown away recently by being reminded, or maybe told for the first time, I can't remember, that MLK was assassinated at a striking event. So he was there to support workers, the working class, and he was also against war in Vietnam. So it's just, I guess, a moment where that solidarity really shines through. It was a tragic moment, but what a great legacy to have left behind.
Absolutely,
I was blown away by that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah,
definitely. He was also one of the most unpopular people in America at the time because of his internationalist stance. Right. So yeah, it just shows you how much this country hates that.
Yeah, and you see the videos, the images of cops taking fire hoses to people just trying to walk across the street, beating on people. I remember this gentleman just trying to walk across the street, and they're just beating him with batons. It's ridiculous. The crossing of I forgot the name of the bridge, with John Lewis on there, and getting attacked by dogs and stuff like that. I mean, you sick German Shepherds. When cops sick German Shepherds on citizens, I mean, that's about as Nazi as you get. You know, do you want American cops to be more or less like Nazis? You have one of the two options. It's just ridiculous. Can we talk about the police here in America at least? I mean, is VAP on that?
Yeah. Sheena, you want me to start or you want to go? Because there's a lot to say.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, right, you know, within the Alliance, again, we are a collection of, you know, organizations, and there's numerous tendencies. But one thing that we agree on is that we recognize the police as an occupying force in the military, right? And that the role of police in society is they are to protect capital. Yep. They exist to protect property. They exist to generate funds for municipalities. And again, they are there to control means of social order. So those deemed undesirable, those communities are going to come in contact with the police the most. It is no coincidence that those that are incarcerated are the poor in general, and Black and brown people in particular, right? That's not by accident. That is by design. It is working to its full capacity. The prison industrial complex, which is, you know, policing, surveillance, and the carceral state. We recognize in Black Alliance for Peace essentially like that, you know, we support community control over the police generally, and that looks like the participatory budgeting, the hiring, firing, the writing of policy, and essentially taking these forces that have historically been used to repress us and, you know, occupy communities to actually empower us. And this is we recognize this is not, you know, something that is incompatible with abolition. We recognize it as a road and a pathway and what we would describe as a radical, practical method of achieving abolition. The police, again, you know, serve as a tool of what we recognize as the ruling class. That's why a lot of rich folks don't be up in jail, though they do commit crimes, right? You know, corporations and businesses, I think every year take over like $200 billion of garnished wages, and nobody says anything and just gets away. And we have to really recognize what is criminalized, and it is crimes of survival. It is addiction. It is mental illness. It's those who have cognitive disabilities, right? The largest psychiatric wards are in prison, right? In Rikers Island, in Cook County, in Chicago, in California, right? We don't value mental health. We don't really value the prosperity of human beings. What we value is, you know, the mass amounts of capital, wealth being hoarded. And essentially this is at the expense of everybody else. And the police kind of have to be that mediating force that can protect those forces, right? Otherwise, there would be, you know, uprisings like we saw in Ferguson and most recently this previous summer. So, yeah, I mean, that's the basic premise of what we feel toward the police. Okay, I can answer specific questions too.
Yeah, no, that's a really good foundation. I do a lot. Probably easily for over a year and a half now. I spend hours a week researching policing in America, and it's just revolting what I have discovered. We starting with the inception of police forces, and like there seems to be like on record a division between northern police and southern police. Southern police departments were designed specifically to hunt down runaway slaves. That's why they existed. And the north, it was really just sort of like a bunch of thugs paid to take care of like rowdy people in the streets, which obviously tended to, in their eyes, to be more minorities than anybody else.
Oh, I have to interject too, because actually I didn't mention that their origins aren't slave catching, but also guess what? Suppressing, right, workers' movements, right? So, who did they call while they were fighting for, you know, 8-hour workday and to end child labor? They called the police, right? Who did they call during the women's suffrage movement? They called the police, and they stuck dogs on you. Who did they call in the civil rights movement? The police. Yep. So historically, the police have been against any transformation of society. So they're really incompatible with societal progress, and that has to be examined, right? I would suggest that the presence of police is a mark of an already failed society, and that police cannot solve crime. They can only respond to it, and that generally, and this is back again tying the international military industrial complex to policing, right? 50% of general funds and municipalities go to policing, essentially, right? And then the 50% of the discretionary budget goes to militarization.
Right.
That should be examined of why, because the United States needs, requires, and maintains itself through violence and repression. And that's just something, again, that we have to examine a little bit further of why that is. And then I think we'll come to some better conclusions on how to deal with some of these societal issues.
Yeah, no, the militarization of the police is extremely disconcerting. You know, you have like some of these towns, I mean, they're like Mayberry from, you know, the whatever that show is, Andy Griffith show. They're small rural towns, and the cops have like some sort of like armed vehicle, like a tank, a small tank. I'm like, why do you have a tank? This is ridiculous. Like nothing happens here. You know, they're spending hundreds, you know, tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars on this stuff that you'll never ever use. And the whole idea, the notion of militarizing, like, why would anybody militarize? Well, it's to prepare for battle. That's why you militarize. So just it seems like just the gesture itself, the behavior itself seems like it's like they're ready to go to war against their own citizenry. And I don't. That's extremely disconcerting. What's that?
That's exactly what it is. You hit it.
Yeah. And I don't I don't want that. I like a life of peace, and I like being able to hang out with my friends without fear of getting shot in the face. But it's just craziness. And like you said, Nick, I mean, the way that the cops approach, they're not here to protect us. So the protect and serve on the side of the cars is a bunch of propaganda crap. I think it was a 2015 Supreme Court case. I think it was 2015 when the Supreme Court decided, their decision was, the police have no legal obligation to protect anybody in the public. That's from the Supreme Court. Their job is to figure out crimes, is to I'm losing the word, but to figure out crimes and who did it. It has nothing to do with helping you at all. Zero. And if you look at the statistics, like as far as the amount of arrests and everything else that goes down, first of all, like you said, it usually happens after the crime's already been committed because they can't get there before it happened. That would be weird. So they're useless in that respect, just logistically. And they oftentimes show up and they don't believe anything that the people are telling them, so they end up arresting the wrong people, and most of the time that's black people. I just watched a couple of videos. The guy blew a stop sign and they got guns on him because they said he was evading the police. He blew a stop sign. He was right by his house. It's so stupid. They terrorize communities. They instill. There have been polls taken where people say that they actually feel afraid and paranoid when they are around police. And to instill fear into somebody is the very definition of a terrorist. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I appreciate it. And I think Sheena wants to say something, but real quickly, the Protect and Serve, a comrade of mine in our organization, actually put me on game. Protect and Serve was actually initially coined by the Black Panther Party. And in Oakland, they took it as a means to obviously chastise them. And then they took it nationally to protect and serve. So that even phrase was taken from black folks, right? Who were protecting and serving the community, the Black Panther Party of self-defense, when they were being terrorized. So there's also a very dark, twisted kind of twins to that phrase, because one, they have no constitutional obligation, but two, they stole it from the Black Panther Party as well, which was formed originally because police were terrorizing us, because that's really their role in society. But if Sheena had anything to add, I've been talking a lot.
It's okay.
I was actually going to say the same thing about the Black Panther Party coining the term protect and serve, because it was really just a spit in the face. And, one thing I did want to, add on to is that I definitely support the work that the Chicago Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression has been doing in terms of the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance. I think that's super historic and probably the best model for police accountability that we have today. But in terms of abolition, when I think about the state of the world, one of the things that I like to keep in mind is that, the amount of human history that there is, and that's a reminder that things were not always this way and they won't always be this way. And the same applies to the police. So those arguments that we need cops don't really hold up for me, because one, police have not always been the go-to for community conflict. Two, how long have Black people actually been able to call the police? And how often does that actually work out? And three, we can't really think about policing without thinking about the origins of policing. In response to, the good cop argument, my favorite thing to ask people is to, explain to me what it means to be a good slave patrol. I don't know how that works exactly. At the end of the day, they still protect those same classes that, oppress us. And in Chicago, we have a particular challenge too. Lori Lightfoot gave millions to the police of our, COVID funds, while Black people were struggling with having the highest COVID rates, out of any other demographic in the country. And again, like Nick said, basically creating the conditions for more violence, and then telling us that you need more policing in that case. And so it's just it's a constant cycle. So
Kelly.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation. There's so many things things that just need to be known, especially about local police. I wanted to ask about the ECPS. Big fan here, brought it up a few times. It's linked in a bunch of videos, and it'll be linked in this one in the comments below soon after this release. Can you guys tell us what in the ECPS, like what it does? I know it's got elected community members. They can't have been police or worked for the DA before. They need to have, I think, 2 years of community service. But what powers does this new elected council have? Does it have hiring, firing, policy setting, budget setting, training? Does it have powers like that over the police force?
I don't want to speak for the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression on this, but I do know that it does give communities the ability to elect their district. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase it, but if Nick, you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, sure. It's a step toward, I would call it a step towards community control of the police.
Okay.
And they essentially are working toward the ballot initiative where folks can vote in Chicago on an ordinance to establish a public safety commission. And then that would be kind of the next step of like participatory budgeting, hiring, firing, and things of that nature. This first initial ECPS gives it establishes a civilian police kind of accountability council, and then the different wards can elect individuals to represent them. And the goal is to solidify that, and then the next is to, they said it. This is from them. Was essentially a compromise, but it was a strategic one. But going forward, the goal is, working towards still community control of the police and all of its faculties.
Excellent. And I wanted to highlight, we brought up Black Panthers and the ECPS. So there's an interview with Howie Hawkins and Frank Chapman where they go into the details there. That'll be linked below. I suggest everybody watch that. And I wanted to also highlight that there's a real tie to capital and the police right now, capital being money acquired by the owners and the owner class. So the Line 3 pipeline right now, where there are protesters, some chaining themselves to tractors and equipment to try to slow the progress of that build for the pipeline. There's been instances of torture where the police are pressing on pressure points and destroying nerves of protesters' faces. More Perfect Union has covered that. And then also I just watched a video today where Enbridge, the oil company, is subsidizing or supplementing the police force pay. So the oil company it's a foreign oil company, is literally funding the police to torture people who are protesting Line 3. So they're definitely against human progress. People are there trying to fight for clean water, the watershed. I mean, all of that water in the area can be destroyed by the smallest of spills from a big pipeline like that. I believe there's already been minor spills that have hurt the local water sources. So yeah, the power of capital, even from foreign countries, is infecting the way our local police forces function. That's who they serve. They're not serving the local community. They're not caring about climate change or about the water sources. They're serving their capital interests. So just wanted to highlight that. That's so true.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and I think that emphasizes the point that we made, that the points that were made earlier, right? The definition of policing has been the regulation and control of a society and community, right? And there's not an era in United States history where the police were not a force of violence against, poor working class people in general and Black people in particular, right? And when you talk about the tactics and methods they're using out there, which I wasn't familiar with the details, but what I can say is the only recommits us to what we said earlier, right? When we talked about police existing to protect property and capital and generating revenue through tickets, fines, and asset forfeitures, right? Through asset forfeiture, the police stole more than so-called thieves, right? So last year, or 2017, there's a study done, and through asset forfeitures, meaning people weren't even convicted of a crime, had their property taken by the police department, right? They stole more than people who actually were arrested and convicted of stealing things, right? Oftentimes these people are stealing out of a need. The police are just stealing because they can. So I always want to bring up these contradictions, that the police are a mythology. and they have been bred in this idea that they are protect and serve, and that they are this noble force of benevolence. But when you look at it historically, when you look at the data empirically on who they're arresting, who they're coming in contact with, the tactics, the methods they use, the militarization, the occupation, when you just look at the history and the development of it, there's no way any logical person can come to the conclusion that the police are a force of good and that can ensure public safety. In fact, I think they are diametric to public safety. I think they should be recognized as outside forces that create violence, and they are forms of harm, right? And they can't be anything else other than that, because their role is to protect property, capital, and to ensure those things are protected.
Yeah, that's their main function, is to protect property, really, and wealth is a type of property, money. I know I had a friend of mine who was down in New Orleans right after Katrina, and she said that you go to the rich neighborhoods and that's where you saw like just a ton of National Guard and cops. You go to the poorer neighborhoods and nobody. They just don't care. It's unbelievable. And we all suffer from this mass delusion. Well, we don't, but a lot of people suffer from this mass delusion that cops are like our buddies, our friends, and here to protect and help us. I had some guy, I was a bartender, who said at the bar one time, the cops give us our freedom. And I'm like, excuse me, I almost kicked him out. I should have just kicked him out. But it's just ridiculous, the sort of perception that people have of policing in America, and when it's really so awful. The American police rate number 6th in the world for yearly police killings. 6th. There are over 200 sovereign countries in the planet with all those totalitarian, regimes and everything else. The land of the free ranks number 6. It's unbelievable. In between 2008 and 2021, in 2 war-torn countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, our enemy combatants killed less American soldiers than cops killed in 20 years. I mean, in less years. Sorry. It's ridiculous, and not enough is being done about it. Now, let me ask you this: talking about police, I'm talking about not being pacifist, but pro-peace, that kind of thing. Last year, in your estimate, it's impossible to prove because it's already happened a certain way, but in your educated opinion, do you think that Derek Chauvin would have even gone to trial if there wasn't violence in the streets after he killed George Floyd? Okay, I would agree too. Like, not a chance. It just probably would have just washed away. It would have been done. Because I again, doing all this research, I'm still here. There's still plenty of cops that are getting away with all sorts of things that you're not hearing about. And I wish every single time something like that happened, which seems almost daily, something somewhere would burn down, and then they would the government's not going to react to something that's not threatening. They're just not. Oh, there's a bunch of people marching in the streets with signs. Oh, okay, cool. Let them do that, and let's go about our business. You start ruining property. You start taking their wealth away. And then they start listening.
Well, I'll tell you this, right? And this is just my thoughts on this, right? There was a reason why there are certain organizations left over from the legacy era that will remain to exist, that were for civil rights and racial equality. The Black Panther Party was dismantled and destroyed. The Black Liberation Army was dismantled and destroyed. Other, the Graham Revolutionary Action Movement as well, with surveillance. And so no offense to these organizations that I'm about to name, but like places like the NAACP pose no threat to the status quo and the order, and it's why they were allowed to remain, right? And they also allowed their leadership to be co-opted, right, by non-African people. So that's one thing I always highlight to folks, that like the United States knows what threatens it, and if you really want to have societal progress, you can't go with what your oppressor is deeming necessary or deeming as the correct way. If they're patting you on the back, you're probably doing it wrong. Your oppressor should not be in line with you saying, I like how you're protesting. I like how you're getting it done. This is civil. If they're doing that, you're doing it wrong.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. If they're okay with it, you're not doing it right. You're exactly right. Sorry, Bashima.
Yeah, no, I also just wanted to add that, as much as I do believe that, the Derek Chauvin verdict wouldn't have happened without that, I also believe that verdict was also 100% pacification, because all you get when you have spontaneous rebellion is pacification. And so, which is why, we'll always push people to join organizations and get organized against these structures, as opposed to, just getting angry and getting out in the streets. Again, not pacifists at all, but I definitely think folks need to get organized, because we're going to continue to have Derek Chauvins until we do. So.
Yeah.
So true.
Kelvin?
Yeah, I'm curious. I want to celebrate some successful actions. We'll call them actions that either provided good influence or brought about one of the goals that BAP has had over time. Do any come to mind that we could look at as like inspiration or aspire to again?
Sure, yeah. I would say, I think we're one of the few organizations domestically that I know of that, raised the issue of Haiti. And I think most recently, and this is before the border, this was prior to, Jovenel Moïse staying in office before his assassination and the mass popular protest that broke out, and just standing in solidarity with our folks on the ground there and raising the issue and bringing that to the forefront of the discourse. I think that's one of the aims that we're trying to do, and recapturing and redeveloping the Black radical tradition, those positions, right? They've been non-existent for a while, and well, they've existed, but they've been kind of like suppressed, quieted, and hushed. The aim is to build a mass movement that is unequivocally unwavering anti-imperialist. So things like that with Haiti, I think when we look at just AFRICOM now having this discussion, I think is a win, right? To be able to have the discussion here, to have a month of action. We began in 2017, like Sheena told you earlier, and since then we have expanded tremendously. So we've added numerous organizations and individuals, and our solidarity network has also expanded. So to me, these are wins because, like I said before, it will not be by benevolent politicians or some charismatic leader that's going to save us or transform these conditions. It's going to be a mass movement. Historically, that's how we've changed society. So I think just the fact that this formation has come into existence, we've continued to struggle. We've continued to be unwavering in our positions that aren't always popular, right? But hindsight is 20/20, right? There's people who were against Afghanistan 20 years ago who were called every name in the book, but now everybody's like, yeah, that was a bad idea. It was not popular at first. So Black Alliance for Peace is recapturing that, right? Like our positions may not be popular all the time, but if you're anti-imperialist, that's what it requires, because there's a lot of undoing and unlearning, and the hegemonic forces here are strong, especially in the heart of empire. So I think there's numerous wins for our campaigns we can count up, but we're never satisfied.
Okay, so also Rob D. Rich is piping in again. Are we all on board with Ajamu Baraka having a presidential run in 2024?
Go ahead.
He wants you to speak it into existence, so I think one or both of you needs to say yes to that.
Look, if you want to invite him here,
He'll come. We should get him on the show. That'd be great. That'd be awesome.
Definitely. Yeah, I would love it. I got my vote, obviously, but
but he started the organization in 2017. How did he start it? What did it look like when he said he established this? Did he start a Facebook page, or how did it work?
I think he reached out to folks in the movement, if my understanding. I don't want to misspeak, but I remember I signed up very early on, and this is how I know the growth has happened, because we didn't have new member orientations when I first signed up. I got a personal email from Ajamu when I first signed up. Now that doesn't happen because it's too much capacity to do, right?
Oh, so but I'm going to join tonight, and I want a personal email from Ajamu.
Email. But a coordinated committee designed that once the alliance had expanded to such a degree that it's meant to absolve. And the coordinated committee with people like Jaribu Hill, Margaret Kimberly of the Black Agenda Report, Rafiki Morris, Dadan, Erica Keynes, I'm trying to think, Netta Freeman, recently Therese Burton-Stelly, she's out here in the Chicago chapter with us. And I feel like I'm missing people, but there are people on the original coordinated committee who are of the movement, because the great thing about the Black Alliance for Peace is an intergenerational organization. And you have folks that are, me and Sheena's age, and folks who was protesting against Vietnam, and there's so much transformation there, and language changed and things to learn from each other. So it's great. And essentially that coordinated committee, originally that steering committee, it was to build the organization and then to decentralize as these different regional organizations in the 5 regions we have to develop. So that's how it first started.
Okay, cool. Vashina, what's NETFA?
Oh, no, I was just helping Nick out with the names of the folks on the coordinating committee. And so NETFA Freeman, who... NETFA's a name. Okay, not an acronym. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. And you've grown exponentially over the years, and it was 2017. That's only 4 years, so that's great that you guys are growing. That's awesome. Is it at all international, or is it pretty much just still here in the States?
It's international. So we have several chapters all over the place. So an organization that we've been working with is HOA PALS, which is the Horn of Africa, Pan-African Liberation. We are building solidarity in Liberia with the SUP, the Student Unification Party. We have chapters and organizing happening in Haiti, in Colombia, and I'm trying to think, Brazil as well. And I feel like I'm missing a lot of places, but like it is international. We have numerous organizers, individuals, and organizations that are spread out.
Gotcha. That's very cool. Is there any sort of international camaraderie or like any sort of international networking, talking to each other? Like in the Green Party here in Illinois, I mean, I don't think I've ever talked to anybody out of the side of the states in the Green Party. Have you, Calvin?
Only Michigan, and just because
right, exactly. I mean, that's so like I don't know, so it's not good, bad, or otherwise. I'm just curious if you guys if there's any sort of connection there.
There's been a few different webinars that we've had with some of our members from the continent, and our BAP Atlanta chapter just recently did a webinar with Friends of the Congo, or teach-in rather, with Friends of the Congo for our month of action on AFRICOM. So definitely there's been some interaction with our international folks as well. So it's been good.
Okay, very cool. And I just want to remind everybody that's watching or will watch later that literally, if you study biology, everybody in the world comes from Africa. I just want you to know that. The human race literally started there. So I don't know how this happened, this whole flip, where we started attacking our ancestral home. It's ridiculous. Calvin, ask something. I'm trying to form my thought. I'm trying to form my thought here.
I was astonished to learn recently that it's likely that our occupying forces in other countries are magnitudes larger because a majority of the forces that are there are quote unquote not the U.S. forces, but they're mercenary groups. And this is done for many of reasons. But a couple of the reasons are they get to say, oh, there's fewer conflicts with the U.S. personnel and the local citizenry. And then also death counts get to be misattributed. Like, oh, there were only so many deaths with our occupation of this area because the other deaths occurred with the mercenary forces, but they're still aligned. They're still over there for the same exact reasons, hired by U.S. contractors and defense companies. I was wondering, I guess, highlighting those facts, is there a way to use that against them to show that it's capital working the way capital does and bring that to attention to people here in the States and somehow make that so that it's obvious that we're doing far more harm whenever we occupy anywhere?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was most astonished to learn recently is that there were part of AFRICOM is training folks on the continent to serve the U.S. military. And so you had folks who were trained by the U.S. military over in Afghanistan, and you don't count them as U.S. military. And so when the U.S. says, we're pulling away from Afghanistan, how true really is that? We have all sorts of other forces, and so as you said, these numbers are drastically misreported. But yeah, I definitely see those connections.
I would say also add, like, when we look at Libya, what I talked about earlier in 2011, there's also other direct and indirect ways that the U.S. can cause harm, and that's oftentimes on pretenses of humanitarian aid or human rights violations, and which is hilarious. It's comical because the United States is one of the #1 violators of human rights. So anytime you hear that, we should be incredibly dubious of why the United States is getting involved, because afterwards, Libya was by every metric, the most prosperous country in Africa. And then afterwards, it turned into an open slave field, right? And then you had about 6 to 7 organizations vying for power. So increased violence, increased, different like sexual assaults and things of that nature that weren't present. Regardless how you feel about Muammar Gaddafi, he had a control over Libya in a way that did not lead to that, right? He was at the time aiming to create an independent currency for Africa, and this did not align with U.S. interests. So we have to examine these things and not and recognize these things aren't coincidences. That he was moving towards that, and he was a Pan-African and then all of a sudden now he is number one target, and he's murdered and the country is in shambles, right? So anytime we're thinking about the U.S. and being concerned about human rights, we should probably just question the entirety of the situation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, today, Colin Powell died today or yesterday, and a lot of as many walls that he broke down and overcame, which was great. Absolutely, he still lied to the American people about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and he says he was given bad information. I'm not so sure I buy that, but I think that there was an agenda. They wanted to go Iraq for some reason. And they just, it's called the false flag theory, and this is more a different type of a version of that. But it's just when politicians, governments lie to the public to rally the public support to go into war, they tell them a bunch of BS that isn't true in order to, they're like, oh, okay, that's a good reason. If they have weapons of mass destruction, we can't have that. Okay, so then they go in and it turns out, oh, we didn't find any. Like, that's okay. And they do whatever they want. And hundreds of thousands of people have died because of that misinformation. Millions. Sorry, I don't mean to sell it short. Millions. It's just it's unbelievable. I was going to ask something else about police, and I forgot again. Sorry, I went off on Colin Powell.
I want to talk about Colin real quick because it's relevant. He also endorsed the My Lai massacres in Vietnam, and it's in his memoir. He endorsed it. So that's another thing. I don't really think he should be celebrated. Him and people like Obama. We should unequivocally recognize them as imperialists, and the United States is an imperialist empire, and I think they get far too much sympathy. Right. And this is what I draw the analogy to. There would be nobody, lamenting Hitler because he did something atrocious, right? Just because these people are Americans does not mean that what their war crimes, should be absolved of them. So I saw a lot of posts and lamenting of it, but if we're being 100%, we're staying consistent. We have to really talk about them in their totality, and these people did commit war crimes.
100%. Socialism. That's what I was going to ask you about. Oh. On your website, you brought about how very far left, radical, and socialist / communist / whatever it was. Talk about that a little bit. We only got about 4 minutes left here. But what is? I've studied socialist systems, and there are so many different types of socialism. Like, what do you you guys? What do you mean by that?
We are a multi-tendency organization. So, we have folks who are communists, we have folks who are socialists, but our fundamental line is that we are an anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist organization. Okay. So, I may be a communist, but, that doesn't have to be everybody in bad. So, as long as we stand firm on our principle that we are anti-capitalist,
gotcha.
We can all get along.
That's probably a better way to do it, is just to be anti-capitalist, and you can sort out the details later, I guess, and like what you're pro of. I mean, again, there's so many different schools of socialism. Everybody thinks that there's a false narrative in this country that socialism means the government controls all industry, and that is simply not the case. Out of the probably hundreds of socialist schools out there, there's probably 2 that believe that. The rest of them are actually more decentralized and anarchistic in that sense, that the workers control their labor. That's really all it comes down to. The workers own their labor. That's what socialism is. Anyway, so okay, very cool. So there's not. If you don't mind me asking you personally, if you don't want to answer, that's fine, because some people don't like this. Do you vote? Do you in the elections, or you just think that's a scam?
I did.
Or both.
I voted in the last presidential election. I voted for Howie Hawkins.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
Are you a Green Party member?
I am. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Are you, Nick?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, good. Oh, great. This is great.
What's funny, so I'll give you a little quick story. The reason why I stumbled upon Ajamu Baraka was his writing with the 2016 election when he ran as the vice presidential candidate in the Green Party. Became, my politics were still forming, right? I just knew that I had issues. I actually took issue with the Bernie Sanders campaign because of his line on Palestine. It wasn't strong enough. And I was like, man, there's nobody who really represents me. And then I read work of Ajamu Baraka and was like, this is the guy. So followed him on social media. 2017, he starts BAP, and I'm like, yup, let's do it. And then became more involved in 2019 in terms of actually organizing with it. I was a passive member, I would say, for the first 2 years. I didn't really do much. So I do vote. I do it, ballot or the bullet, like Malcolm said. But in the reality, I don't vote for imperialists, so I never compromise on that.
Bullet. I like that.
Yeah, I'm not voting for no imperialist. And I do a lot of work at the local level, especially just in my community. So I think local elections can actually yield a lot of power if done correctly. But at the national level, I'm not voting for these people. I voted for Howie Hawkins as well. And I always do third party. PSL, sometimes on the ballot, I'll vote for PSL. I'll vote for Green Party. But I certainly will not vote for any Democrat.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
Not happening.
I'll sneak my favorite topic in here. One of my favorites. So ranked choice voting, we're good with it. We like it. I mean, we don't want everything to just be solved electorally. We know that can't be the case, but when it does come to electoral politics, we're for ranked choice voting, right? Maybe.
Yeah. I'll go ahead. Shane, you have something?
No, I was just saying, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm big on direct democratic systems. So, you know, I've actually been studying things like the Zapatista has been studying things like the third universal theory and trying to come about what I think is best. But the ranked choice voting is certainly more democratic than what we currently have.
100%.
Definitely, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt there. Oh, it's actually 8 o'clock. Wow, that flew by. That was the fastest show perceived to be ever because it was so damn interesting. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
All right, we hang on for after the show because I want to sign you guys up for another show. Is that okay? Because there's a lot more to talk about. I'm not even kidding. I mean, we could just go on and on, but we need to end the show now. Calvin, do you have any final words for tonight?
I learned a lot. Thank you all so much for coming on. Everybody go sign up on the website. We'll throw it up on the screen one more time. And then also in the descriptions, there were 2 links sent. One was for the Facebook event. Go down in Facebook and YouTube and look for that there. And then another was for a Google Doc. I'm sorry, what was that for again?
Oh, that form was for the endorsement of our month of action on AFRICOM. Nice. I also included a form that is a petition against the 1033 program.
Cool.
Okay. They will both be in the comment section and in the descriptions. And then that's it for me. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining another episode of the Illinois Green Party series with your host, David Rich and Kelvin Tomaszko. Tonight, we had the pleasure of talking to Nick and Vashina from the Black Alliance for Peace organization. Learned a ton. And again, there's so much more to talk about. I mean, so much more. Thank you for doing what you do, because this is really important. And the word needs to get out more and more. And that's why I want to have you guys on the show again. Okay, so till next time, everybody, be good.